Hi, welcome to Storytime with Dad Booker. Appreciate you dropping by. Let's continue on with before and after, or I think that's what it is today. Past and future, beg your pardon. From Sheriff in a Small Town. So let's get on it. Morgan was sitting in the kitchen sharing a pot of coffee with Agness. In the 2 hours he had been there, he hadn't said more than a few words. Agness had always marveled at her father. His body was always ramrod straight. He was tough as nails, but only when he needed to be. Now his whole body seemed shrunk and bent. His eyes had lost their intense look. He seemed to be a old... Dad, what have you been doing lately? Leaning forward, she tried to show she was really interested in his answer. He looked into her eyes and sighed. Not much. I'm pretty much fished out. Doesn't seem to be much reason for doing anything anymore. Rocky and Talbot have got this town in fine fettle. Don't need me anymore. I guess I'm just done. He sipped his coffee and took a few bites of a chocolate cake Agness had made. Looking at her father now was breaking her heart. He couldn't see that the reason the town was in such fine shape was because of what he had done before. What he had done before. And that phrase was the answer. She went into the TV room, which had once been his office. Bringing out his old Pressman typewriter and a stack of blank paper, she sat down beside him. The quizzical look on his face made her laugh. She had a feeling he might belittle his past achievements. His modesty sometimes drove her crazy. This time, though, she had an ace up her sleeve. Dad, why not write your memoirs? Honey, that's all in the past. Nobody cares about those days anymore. She pulled out the ace. Dad, a letter came from the courthouse addressed to the current sheriff. Rocky opened it, but after reading it, he wanted me to pass it over to you. Morgan put on his glasses and read it out loud. To the sheriff of Lake Logan County, Ohio. Sir or ma'am, I'm the dean of basic police training at Public College. My students have requested that I invite a sheriff from one of Ohio's more rural areas to discuss the contrasts in rural and large metropolitan enforcement. We would appreciate it if you could see your way to speaking to our class for a couple of days. We can make arrangements for your lodging and we will make the cafeteria available for your meals. If he is available, we would also like to invite Sheriff Marvin Morgan, who we hear has retired, to attend. His record of achievements is well known in our training discussions, and a talk from him would be very informative. Please let us know if you are available and would like to join us. If so, please let us know when you'll be arriving and your preferred mode of travel. If you're reluctant to join us, please let him know it's Costello asking. Very respectfully, Calvin G. Dartman, COP, retired. Agness was intrigued by the nickname. Who's Costello? Morgan pointed at the name at the bottom of the letter. Cal was. We made a reputation for ourselves not only as investigators, but as a team with a sense of humor. I was Bud Abbott to his Costello. He was working out of Little Chicago, and we were on the border where the surplus went. Agness had heard of Chicago, but not Little Chicago. Sorry. You ever have a Monday that lasted for about 5 or 6 days? There we go, okay. There were a few places across the U.S., and Hamilton was one of them. Gangsters would use it as a meeting point. There was illegal booze and brothels. When the feds came, they would put the girls in trailers and bring them over the line to here. We were getting close to being as bad as Hamilton. The place was corrupt and people were getting scared. That's when they appointed me the new sheriff. Calvin was in Hamilton. We started working together to clean things up. It seems like ages ago. He got on the phone to Rocky. Son, do you think Talbot would mind holding down the fort for a week? Yeah, sure, what's up? You know darn well what's up. You saw the letter. Yeah, but I figured you'd want to go alone. Kind of a star attraction for all your admirers. Shut up, son. Come home and get a bag packed and we'll let them know we're coming. We can get our skates on, we can catch the 1400 train and be there in time for dinner. On the train ride, Morgan was patiently fending off Rocky's questions. Son, I don't want to tell them the same stories over and over. You'll hear them when we get to class. Besides, everything I did you've seen on the wall over at the Historical Society and in the logs at the courthouse. Dad, the trouble is all you ever put in was a barest amount. City and all the corruption in our own. Yeah, sure I was, but me and a few deputies took the time to do our job. Community wanted things cleaned up, so they all helped. All it took, once we were all on the same page, was time and patience. He turned and looked out the window. Rocky stared at the back of his head and realized the stubborn old man wasn't going to talk about his time more than necessary. Over a cup of thermos coffee and some of Agnes's oatmeal raisin cookies, Rocky did elicit one small piece of information. Son, who's our boss? You mean Agness? Stop fooling. I mean, the sheriff. Who's our boss? Pretty much everybody in town. I mean, they voted me in. That's first rule of being a sheriff, knowing that you walk a fine line every day. It's your job to keep the peace in a place where everyone is your boss. Your authority is in the respect you show and the respect you've earned. Wear your badge with pride, but let the pride be for what you're responsible for, not for yourself. You do that, the people will be willing to work with you. Start lording it over them, and you lose any chance to do good by them. So city policeman has a larger group to cover in a smaller, compact area. That's more or less the only difference. Both got problems daily, and we have to work with people daily. He reached in the bag for another cookie. Rocky checked his watch. They'd be at the station in a few minutes. He went to the bathroom to check if he was presentable. First news to me was a friend of his father-in-law's. He wanted to make a good first impression. Standing on the platform, they waited for their escort. The sound of a loud, "Hey, up!" Morgan turned in the direction of the voice, and a huge grin bisected his face. "Hey, Lou, it's good to see you after all these years. You're looking great. So are you. This the new sheriff of Logan County? Lake Logan?" Morgan pulled Rocky forward. "Not only sheriff, but my son-in-law. Rocky, say hello to Cal Dartman. Best officer I ever worked with in some of the toughest times I ever faced." The two men shook hands. Rocky liked the look of Cal. When he wasn't smiling, which wasn't often, he had the look of a stern man. A fair man, too, from the look around his eyes. He could feel the man's integrity just by being in his presence. Cal and his father-in-law seemed to be been made from the same mold. A car was waiting. They were whisked off to a good restaurant. Over dinner and wine, the men discussed the questions they could expect from the class. It was also decided that Morgan would speak first. That night, Rocky was nervous and busily working out what he could say that might be interesting to the class. In Morgan's room came the rhythmical sound of deep snoring. The classroom had been reset into a half circle. A couple of comfortable chairs had been found for the guest speakers. Morgan was introduced, and the town he watched over was briefly described. Morgan explained that he was going to explain what being a rural sheriff was like during the 20s. Rocky would speak about the present. "Well, when I was elected, I didn't realize all that I was getting myself into. I knew there was corruption in our little town, but never realized how bad things were. In fact, it was on account of the previous sheriff's corruption that a special election had been held. People were tired of gangsters roaming freely and wanted change. You see, Hamilton, Ohio was right next door and was known as Little Chicago. Lots of gangsters used it as an in-between place for meeting, and the town was full of gambling joints, half houses, and brothels. Well, whenever the feds came round, they'd just pack up everything and bring over the line to my little burg. Hell, they even had a mobile home set up for the brothels. Got so bad that Lake Logan was becoming just an extension of Hamilton. The biggest difference in Hamilton and Lake Logan was policemen like Cal worked for a department. I worked alone. I had no funds for a deputy, and the crooked government in my town sure as hell wasn't going to give me any. They're being well paid to allow the overflow in without hindrance. I even tried calling the governor to see if he could send some National Guard. He said he was not going to send them out on what was a police matter. So I was on my own. Let me get a drink real quick, sorry. Get this thing open. Don't want to show whose it is because they're not sponsoring me, so they don't get credit. Much better. I called over. I don't know why that does that to me. I called over to Hamilton begging for help. Short-handed though they were, they sent over Officer Dartman. He looked over my situation. I had decided that if the people wanted the place cleaned up, then they'd have to help. Cadet raised his hand, which Morgan acknowledged. Sheriff, you shouldn't have used civilians, he sat smugly after having delivered this rebuke. From Rockey's position, he saw the back of Morgan's neck turn red. Morgan calmed down and addressed the young man. Well, sir, I'd be interested to hear your analysis of what I should have done. From the back of the room, Cal asked the student to stand for his reply. Okay, Cadet Michael, you have publicly called out Sheriff Morgan on his handling of a situation in which you haven't heard all the details, a situation that I also was involved in and had approved of his decision. So you have told us both we were wrong. Granted, we were young and fairly new on the job, so it is possible we had made a mistake. Well, what should we have done? Cal tried to make his voice casual, but there was a challenge in it he couldn't hide. The student stood there, red-faced and silent. The sound of the ticking clock seemed loud as the student fought his inner battle. Sir, I don't know how the civilians were used, and I don't have enough knowledge and experience to give you an answer. He sat down. Morgan looked pitying on the cadet. Son, there's going to be many times in your career when you have to make a decision, and 99% of the time, you won't have all the information you need. Keep at your training and learn from past situations, your own and others. We all make a bad call because we aren't perfect. Fix it and press on. He turned to the rest of the class who had been listening intently. They seemed to be interested. He decided to bring them into the story. How do you make this kind of crime leave? One hand was hesitatingly raised. Make them unprofitable? Yep, that's the only thing that could work in a situation like that. I talked to plenty of the civic groups. It became a matter of pride to not use the truck gambling places and mobile home brothels. Oh, a few people still went, but not enough for the cost of sending them around. I had a contingent from the town council who were paid by the bootleggers and gangsters to allow them to bring their stuff in. With hardly anybody using them, they were getting plenty of heat. All I could do was shrug. Hell, you can't force people to gamble or visit the ladies of the evening. Well, the gangsters weren't content to let things be and started robbing places. I had a group come to me offering their services. They became my eyes and ears. They had worked up signals for themselves to pass messages along when gangsters were heading for a robbery. I deputized a few World War I vets who I knew I could trust. They were stationed at any place that held large sums. The rule was shoot to wound, not to kill. Kill a gangster and they retaliate. Wound him and they have to drag him out and patch him up. The damage we did to them assisted in small measure the officers in Hamilton. We were putting small groups out of action, which made cleanups for them easier. Took a few years, but eventually we made them see that it wasn't going to help coming over the line. He looked around to see if there was any questions, a hand raised eagerly. Sheriff, being rural, do you consider that easier or harder than being a city officer? Morton gave this careful consideration. I'd say a little bit of both. I have a wide area to cover, and there might be only the sheriff and the deputy. Advantage is that it's so spread out, people aren't stepping on each other's toes. Disadvantage is that you spend a lot of time checking on things over that wide area that takes time away from the main town. Usually one of us would head out on patrol while the other manned the office. Another hand shot up. Sheriff, what's the most unusual thing that has happened that wouldn't have happened in the city? Sheriff Morgan sat forward as if he had been eagerly awaiting for the question to be asked. I'd hope somebody would ask something like that. Let me tell you about something that happened to my deputy a while ago. As I said, we do a lot of traveling, and on a nice night, we usually like to walk through town. Well, Deputy Talbot was walking past the tavern when he noticed that one of the patrons was intoxicated to such an extent it wasn't safe to let them take their conveyance home. He looked up to see a sea of puzzled faces. Problem was that their conveyance was a horse, which was also plastered. It had been drinking beer as well as its owner. Customers had been buying them both rounds all night. Snickers turned to laughter. Calling the man out, Talbot placed him on the back of the horse, and he brought them both to the jail for safety's sake. Once the man was in a cell and asleep, he had to deal with the horse. Talbot still knew and didn't know where the man and horse had come from. Me? I would have tied the horse out back. Talbot had other ideas. He cleared out the other cell and placed the mattress on the ground. Leaving the horse in, it promptly lay down on the mattress. Talbot placed a pillow under its head and threw a blanket over it. When I arrived in the morning shift, I was told that we had a couple of them in the cells and that they were okay to be released. They were just sleeping off a night's debauchery. It was a while before I checked on the cells, as I had some things to fax off immediately. When I looked into the cell, Houston was just waking up with a headache. Passed him a glass of water and an aspirin. I checked the other cell, and the horse was just also getting up. Tell you, a horse with a hangover is a sorry sight, and I wasn't sure what I could do for it. I just put in a bucket of water, hopped over to the feed store for a little food for him. Houston lived in town, and he and his horse walked slowly home. There was tremendous clapping and cheering, so it was decided to stop there. Rocky would have his turn the next day. In the morning, on the way to class, Rocky nervously talked with Morgan. I still don't know what to talk about, Dad. I mean, how much has happened on my shift? Morgan slapped Rocky gently upside the head. Hell, I seem to recall a big to-do a while back that got you pretty badly injured. Then there was the time your wife was held hostage. What about the time the bank was robbed and your wife tackled the thief along with the rest of the town? Rocky grinned and rubbed his jaw. Yeah, I remember how mad that made you, too. Anyways, let them ask the questions after you give a short intro. They walked into the class and were offered coffee from an urn in the back. Walking towards the chair, Rocky started talking as he walked. Yesterday, Sheriff Morgan spoke on the past. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the president. Sheriff Morgan spoke of the 20s because through his determination and the cooperation of the town, things were stable for quite a while. I guess it's easy to think that a rural jurisdiction would be an easy life on a sheriff. Nice folks around you sitting behind the desk or walking around in town talking about the weather. Well, sorry to burst your bubble, but the big bad world is encroaching on the small towns as much as ever. We have people use our town as a safe harbor while they got ready to violently protest. Fortunately, we were able to find their hiding places and catch them before they did any damage. He grew angry as memory stirred. We had to call in the federal agents to deal with these people. So they were up in trees and had ammo enough to start a small war. I was sent ahead so that I could see things from above their nests. When the feds came in, sirens blaring, I saw that those in the trees were ready to shoot those on the ground. He paused and wiped his brow. While the federal agents tried to smoke them out, they were being shot at from above. I started sniping from my position with tear gas as the agents tried to fire from below. Tree by tree, we slowly cleared them until we got to the tree closest to my location. My vision was obscured by a large branch, so I climbed down. Those on this ledge were firing at friend and foe alike. I did a little more sniping, but by climbing down, I became visible and took some hits. Lying down, I heard the sound of a woman and children from within a stacked box enclosure. Someone in that damn group had brought their wife and children. His voice was suffused with anger. Rocky paused to collect himself. I tried to tell him to stop firing as I fell, but it was no use. Nobody could hear me. I dropped down about 20 feet onto some bushes. The stand burst into flames and explosions. From above, a small wrapped bundle fell down, which I was thankfully able to catch. A small baby was the only survivor. I'd hoped that was the end of it, but it wasn't. A member of the group was relieved after saying they had been captured. The man and his nephew went gunning for Morgan and myself. When we were told of what happened, they ambushed us there. When we approached the house, they had my wife as a hostage and were holding a knife to her throat. Fortunately, as the daughter of a sheriff and the wife of another, she had a cool head. At a hand signal from me, she pretended to faint, opening the way for us to fire. It's not after. We've had to capture a couple who had passed through our town with a child they had kidnapped. We had to do search and recovery also. Of how the big world encroaches on even a place as small as ours. What doesn't seem to change are the people that are our bosses. We work for the people of our jurisdiction and never forget that we were put in our position by them. We walk a fine line between upholding the law and knowing how far to break, and you have to incarcerate. We're there to help around whenever it's needed. By working with the community, we earn the respect of the people we serve, able to do our job efficiently and safely. If he had been Morgan about the one they had. I'd had to say this one I handed like, wow, we've been called by Mrs. Hamilton, complaining that there's someone in her house. Oh, she's 87. And a couple of small birds. She calls us about every few days. We do a check around and through the thing, we're sure we go. Well, a couple of days ago, I asked for us to stay a while. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, and she did too. She got into bed. She got into bed, and I sat in a chair beside her. She wanted to stay awake and talked about her canaries. She talked about their care and feeding and how they were such a loving couple and flirted with each other all day. In the corner was her hanging cage covered in a blanket. Suddenly she grabbed my arm. I hear him, she whispered. I had heard something too. It was a quiet male voice. I did a check outside the window and through the house and couldn't find anything. Still hear the voices, though, and walked around to find where it was strongest. Turning on the light, I listened. The sound was coming close to the birdcage. In fact, it was coming from the birdcage. Mrs. Hamilton had two parakeets, not canaries, and parakeets could talk. Seems the two were very much in love, and once covered, he spent the night whispering sweet nothings into his girlfriend. It's one thing I love about our job. You never know what's going to happen that day. The group applauded and then went to the cafeteria for a meal. Morgan sat with one group, Rocky had another, and the instructor with a third. And this is where the more interesting conversations were held. Left, Morgan, Rocky, and Cal sat drinking coffee and talking. Cal had a paper he was fiddling with. After half an hour of talking, he placed it in front of Morgan. Marvin, I've been talking to the Lake Logan Community College. They're starting a new degree in law enforcement and want you to head it up. Morgan read the paper through and looked up with eyes shining. Marvin, with your reputation and years of experience, those cadets will gain more knowledge than just what's in the books. I think I know you about as well as anyone, and I really would suggest you accept. Choice is yours, of course. He stood and shook their hands and left. By the time they returned home, Morgan had decided to accept. Okay, so that's it. We're getting close to the end. We got a couple more chapters, 2 more chapters. And then we'll be done with this book. So that's it for today. Appreciate you stopping by. I hope you are enjoying these. I'd like some comments if you don't mind, or subscribers or likes or whatever you can give me, and let me know that you're listening in. So we'll talk later. Look forward to seeing you in another couple of days, and have a good day. Be good and be good to yourself. Bye.